Few questions are harder to answer than the question of when to let go. Not of objects, not of situations, of people. Of relationships that were once significant and that have now become something else. Something painful, or exhausting, or simply absent in the ways that matter. The difficulty is that relationships, unlike most things in life, resist clear endings. They are not projects with completion criteria. They exist in constant motion, sometimes better, sometimes worse, sometimes dormant in ways that are hard to distinguish from dead. And the history of the relationship carries weight that makes objectivity nearly impossible. You are not evaluating a situation. You are evaluating something that contains years of meaning, care, and shared identity. There is also the role of hope. The belief that things could change. That the person you knew, or the relationship you had at its best, is still available if only the circumstances were different, if only both of you tried harder, if only. Hope is not nothing. Sometimes things do change. People do grow. Relationships that looked irreparable do recover. Dismissing hope too quickly is also a mistake. But there is a specific kind of hope that is not hope. It is attachment masquerading as hope, the inability to let go dressed as the belief that things will improve. And distinguishing between genuine hope and attachment is one of the hardest psychological tasks there is. The research on what predicts relationship failure offers some clarity. John Gottman's longitudinal research identified what he calls the four horsemen: contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling, as the strongest predictors of eventual dissolution. And specifically contempt, the belief that the other person is fundamentally inferior or deserving of disdain, was the single strongest predictor. Not conflict. Not distance. Contempt. The distinction is important because conflict is not the problem. Healthy relationships have conflict. What matters is whether conflict is navigated with fundamental respect and tact, or whether it has given way to the belief that the other person is beneath respect. The Lubavitcher Rebbe addressed the question of relationships, specifically difficult ones, with a nuance that is rare. He did not teach that all relationships should be maintained at all costs. He also did not teach that relationships should be abandoned at the first sign of difficulty. He distinguished carefully between relationships that are difficult but fundamentally alive, where the core bond is intact and the difficulty is about specific patterns that can change, and relationships that have become fundamentally corrosive, where the presence of the other person in your life is a consistent source of harm that cannot be addressed. He was particularly attentive to the spiritual dimension of relationships, the question of whether a given relationship is drawing you toward or away from who you are trying to become. A relationship that consistently activates the worst version of you, that generates shame or diminishment rather than growth, is not serving its fundamental purpose regardless of how long it has existed. There is no simple algorithm. But there are some useful questions to sit with. Does the relationship have more moments of genuine connection than disconnection? When you imagine the relationship a year from now, if nothing changes, does that image improve or worsen? Can you have an honest conversation about what is not working without it destroying the relationship? Is there mutual care, not just the appearance of it, but an actual investment in each other's well-being? And one that the Rebbe would recognize: does this relationship make it easier or harder to be who you are supposed to be? The answer will not always be clear immediately. But asking the question honestly, and sitting with the answer without the distortions of attachment or avoidance, is where clarity eventually becomes possible.